Welcome to T-Rex Radio and video now. I'm here with Brad Surak. Brad recently joined Turntide from Hitachi, and he is the Chief Product Officer. He's been around for about a month now, and I can tell you his impact has been felt. Brad, thanks for joining us today.
Great, thanks for hosting me. Appreciate it.
So Brad's pretty well published. He's he's written a number of articles and published some videos, and I've had a chance to peruse them a bit and learn about his background. So thanks for that, Brad. That was really helpful. In your writings, it's clear from your experience and in prior roles that you've done quite a bit with digitization, and in particular working with lots of data and analytics and machine learning and finding ways that we can create sources of value for customers. Obviously, you did that in a much larger context than Turntide is right now, but ultimately, the future of Turntide will involve sensors, and will involve data, and will involve quite a bit of analytics. Right now the focus is on the motor, but the motor needs software to run it. And so once you have software running a motor, then you'd be remiss not to do some analytics and so forth.
Yeah,
so I'd love to get your preliminary thoughts and perspectives on, what do you see in the future for Turntide as it relates to data and analytics?
Sure. I think, my own personal journey, I've been working in analytics for, a couple of decades, from the early days of data warehousing all the way through where we are now with data science and some ML and AI based techniques. But I think I got this pivot about 10 years ago into machine data an IoT, just as a natural progression of analytics and different data types starting to proliferate. And then that's what took me to General Electric, where I think that was where we were really pioneering some of the techniques that I think we could use here at Turntide. What I've come to see is, machines, or the value of a machine, is really shifting from hardware to software. And so, a simple way to think about this is the progression we see in our daily lives with the self-driving cars. It used to be the Tesla was the best example. Now every car, right, has automated backing up and parking itself, and lane assist and self-driving, capabilities to different levels. And you think about that and you're like, well, what's really differentiated about the vehicle is the experience that you get in the software that controls it versus the hardware that makes it up. That's not how you're differentiating. And the same is true on other pieces of equipment. And that was, we explored that space at General Electric around aircraft engines and around wind turbines and locomotives and power generation equipment and things of that nature. And then, got into smaller pieces of equipment, what you would consider more commodity-based equipment, like air compressors and things like that, when I got into Hitachi Group. And I think that's what led me to find out about Turntide. I had to give a presentation to a whole lot of manufacturing executives in Tokyo at Hitachi, and I had to talk about digital transformation. And these are people who are running businesses, some of which are 100 years old, and they're dominant in their space. And they're just sort of like, what are you going to tell me about my business that I don't already know? And so I was trying to think, how can I get some example at the end of my presentation that could give people, a catalyst, get them, to understand that they need to move and they need to move fast. And so Turntide, it's a software motor company at the time, I was introduced to through a friend of mine. And the very first product that Hitachi had ever built was this electric motor 109 years ago. And so I put a picture of that motor up, and then I put a software motor company motor up, and then I use that as my closing argument to basically say, if you think you're in an industry that you've got time to think about this, and the impact of digitization on your business is, slow to move, and you're not going to be disrupted by a Silicon Valley startup, think again. This is how it's going to happen. And that's what brought me here to begin with. And I see Turntide can do now things that it used to take billions of dollars and massive R&D departments at these big industrial companies. Turntide can actually go do that today with the advancement in technology. And I think they've proven that. We've proven that in the motor system with the advancement of the control systems. But I think, understanding what that motor is actually installed in and the whole system around that, there's huge opportunity there.
So tell me a little bit, what do you see as some potential, what are some examples of use cases where, I'm very fond of Mark Andreessen's expression that software eats the world.
Yeah.
I look at my iPhone, for example, and all of the icons on the screen of my iPhone were formerly physical objects, right? It's got a camera. You used to have to carry around a camera. It's got a video camera. It's got a clock. It's got a stopwatch. It's got a voice recorder. It's a music player. I mean, it's amazing, like every single icon on the screen, a calendar, right?
Yeah.
And it's everything has become digital, and it now resides behind this piece of glass when it used to be a physical object. And so I'm curious, like when people ask me what Turntide does, I say it's software wrapped in metal, right? And what we're doing is we're turning motors into software. And so, I'm curious, like, what possibilities do you see when we turn a motor into software? What are some value propositions that and these might be theoretical. I think time will tell. But what are some value propositions that you see for customers when we digitize the motor?
Sure. My favorite of your examples of the icons is the save button. First, the need for a save button. The second is it's a picture of like a 3.5-inch floppy disk. And my daughter is 11 years old, and she's like, "What is that thing why does that mean saving?" But it is funny. I think some of the use cases I see is if you understand the context, the motor's the heart of any piece of rotating equipment, right? And if you think of how much rotating equipment is out there in the world, it's the largest class of equipment that you find. And we know the implications of the energy efficiency of the motor, but in terms of the smarts of the motor, right? The motor is actually also a sensor, and and the more that it understands about the physics of the machine that it's in, it can understand the condition of that machine. It can help drive smart operation of that machine. So a smart motor can make a machine connected and can make that machine smart. So some examples of that, there's a lot of different examples. If you're operating a building, as an example, putting a smart motor in a rooftop HVAC system, it gives you all the benefits of the efficiency, but the smartness of it can help you get into this more operational experience level stuff. What I mean by that is in the age we're living in right now with the pandemic, a sensor installed inside of the building can sense the air quality and occupancy, and you can actually increase airflow through the building, which gives it a safer operating envelope for people, less exposure risk to the virus. You can actually dial in, I want to run as efficient as possible, but I want to run within this level of experience. If you pair that up with a building management system, now you've got, this really, this ability to control the experience and optimize that experience for an energy efficiency too. And so that you drive that. If you get outside of buildings and autonomous operation of buildings, you move into other types of equipment, conveyor belts or other kinds of machinery. There's a machine that I've worked with in the past it rolls a piece of metal through some really big rollers, and it gets it to a very precise, dimension, and it's measured with lasers. You can't see the waves in the metal, but the lasers can detect it. And as those big rollers wear out, it puts these microscopic little waves in the metal, and that's for the application of it, that's not good. And so they have to stop the machine. They got to change the rollers out with new rollers. It's down for a period of time. It's expensive to do that. What we were able to do with a smart control system, which is really what's driving our smart motor, is able to adapt how we roll that metal. So the machine itself can learn, and we used some AI-based techniques to say, when you start to detect these little little fluctuations, you know that that roller is wearing out. And based on the wear pattern of that roller, you know, if you just change how you move that metal through there, you can actually maintain the same quality of the outcome without changing out the parts, without taking the machine down. So it really is about machines starting to get better at delivering an outcome for the customer. And you know, and the motor is a key component of that. The control system is really the smarts that we're talking about there. And I think that's where you can imagine that kind of a use case across wide range of industries. And that's what's so exciting about this space for me.
You wrote an article that really landed with me about a collaboration that you did with GM during the COVID crisis, where in a matter of days, I think it was 6 days, if I recall correctly, they repurposed the assembly line for making airbags to make masks.
Yeah.
And I was just struck by, you know, how quickly you were able to do that as a result of the adaptability that was built into the system. And it seems, you know, the more things go from hardware to software, you know, with these sensors, the more it enables that kind of flexibility, right? To be a lot more agile, whether it's a production line or an office or a retail environment, right? You can be very flexible to adapt in pretty short order.
So that's a good point, Paul. It's a good observation. And I think that's, you know, that was the way as we were looking at the forecasting the future. You know, you had to, at these bigger companies, you try to look out at, and you say, what's the, I was given this assignment at Hitachi, come and tell the board of directors your perspective on what the world's going to be like in 20 years. You know, how do you do that? So I think the way that we approached it was, the world is moving into less predictability, you know, more disruption, you know, less stability, and on a lot of levels that I think a lot of people really appreciate. But from a business point of view, having that agility is the key to survival now. It used to be the key to differentiation. Now it's the key to survival. And and those who do it well are the ones who are going to thrive. And I think this last year has, you know, really proven that point. The companies who were advanced already in their digital transformation were able to adapt to the new normal that was brought on by the social distancing. GM was a great example of that. I mean, we had 300 factories at Hitachi that we were able to continue operating in large part because we had put in a lot of technologies, not just that changed the machines around, but also, you know, we had LiDAR, laser radar that could also help us gauge, are we socially distant? Are we where are the bottlenecks in our assembly lines? Like, how can we safely operate? And I think that example with the buildings and the air sensors and how we drive, if retailers had that at the beginning of the crisis and you know, they could safely operate a lot sooner than they were able to without it.
You started by saying what used to be a competitive advantage is now table stakes. And you know, we saw this during COVID. The companies that were able to really quickly react demonstrated that agility, that flexibility, that adaptability. And you know, I think COVID kind of forced, like it accelerated the shift from what used to be a competitive advantage is now, like, you know, a cost of entry in that sense. And yeah, that example of the factories I thought was really cool, using LiDAR and using thermal sensors as well to, you know, see who might have had elevated temperature in their body. And when people get sick, you've got a history with the contract tracing.
Well, yeah, and the nice part is it's an investment that that's different from in the past, where you install a system and you get whatever value you're expecting from the system. In this case, the technology that we're thinking about here at Turntide, and that kinds of technologies you were just referring to in the factories, they're evergreen in their nature. We could layer, because they are software defined in many ways, you know, a LiDAR sensor that we didn't install the LiDAR sensors in the factory for social distance monitoring. We installed them so that we could geofence machines and look for people walking close to the machine without a hard hat, for example, shut the machine down, or repetitive stress. Then we learned, you know what, we have visibility on how someone is actually doing a repair. We could identify ways that they're doing it that could cause repetitive stress injuries. We actually reduced our accident rate by 45%. with that technology. We didn't originally dream of that when we installed those sensors. We layered that use case on top of it. And then when COVID hit, it was already in place, and we were able to quickly add the algorithms necessary to do social distance monitoring and contact tracing as a result. And I think that's the way to think about what Turntide can
Yeah.
do, having a smart motor inside of a piece of equipment in a facility, whether it be a building or a factory, or it doesn't matter, an assembly line. It gives you that ability to kind of constantly renew, add more value, and that's what adaptability, I think, really means.
Yeah, it's the image that was popping into my head is I don't know if it was Cortez when he reached the new land, he burned all the ships, right, so that people would be motivated. And it's kind of like Turntide has that, in the sense that you can't get switch reluctance to work without software. It's
Right.
sort of like Ryan talks about the tailwinds of Moore's law and the computational requirements just to stabilize this, this otherwise difficult to control technology. And so it's akin to Cortez in the sense that, like, we don't have a choice. It's sort of like we can't, and it helps that we're in a nimble startup, so we can move pretty quickly on these kinds of things, but it's actually a constraint, it's a requirement. And so
Yeah, and it's
versus
cool.
a big company.
How I came to think about the journey at GE and Hitachi, and it's going on at all these industrial companies, this digital industrial transformation. It wasn't that they were becoming digital. It was that you had to mix together industrial capabilities and digital capabilities to really create this third, set of capabilities, which was fluency in both. And so we would talk in terms of, a digital industrial transformation, and we needed the folks, and in fact, all of our success was due to mixing teams together that brought, the physics-based expertise, the in-the-field maintenance expertise with data science and, cloud-based technologies. And that's when the magic happened. And so these companies are trying to get that through transformation. I think Turntide is one of the few examples of the born digital industrial company.
Yeah.
And that's what got me excited. I didn't have to go move a battleship in order to, get this to work. I didn't have to go convince 650 Japanese industrial executives that this was a good idea. We know it's a good idea. Now, how can we go fast? I think that's the exciting part for me.
I did some work a while back. I did some consulting work for Target. And they were trying to bolster their online presence, right? But like Target is by origin a bricks and mortar chain, and you're trying to compete with somebody like Amazon, who they're digitally native. And when your company is digitally native, and you are digital from the get-go, it's built into the DNA, it's built into everything about how the company is structured and operated, and its value propositions and so forth. And there's no legacy business, there's no actual physical stores that you need to manage, and the associated incentives with doing that, even if it's a declining market. And so it makes it that much more difficult to compete in the digital space when you're an incumbent that hasn't done that historically, which I think is a huge advantage that Turntide has, because
I agree.
We're starting with software.
Well, and that's what got me here. That's what got me excited. Having focused on trying to transform the incumbents, I saw the opportunity of approaching it from a perspective of Turntide.
You just said something that I think is probably a good segue to looking inside Turntide. You're a month in now, and you've got quite a bit. I mean, of all the executives within Turntide, I think you probably have like the broadest base of experience. And in terms of the number of different things that you've done and the range of scale that you've taken things. Everything from smaller players and departments to gigantic multi-billion-dollar business units. And so I'm curious. You mentioned the importance of I forget exactly how you put it, but being like both digital as well as industrial, and getting that cross-functional coordination. And obviously, I think that really rings true for Turntide. And so I'm curious if I know you've shared with me some of your thoughts on how do you organize a company, and in a way that encourages cross-functional coordination, that encourages individual and small group agency, right? That empowers people to drive things forward in a non-industrial way, in a more collaborative way. And I've seen some of your thoughts. I'm curious if you could maybe share some of that thinking. And how do you think that's going?
I'll try not to get too I could geek out on this area, so I'll try to stop me if I'm going too deep. But I think, you know, the scale that I've operated at has been out of necessity, not out of choice. You know, I guess in some ways, you know, going to a GE, you have the ability at that point in my career, I saw it as an ability to go impact the world in a big way, and you needed to be at a big company to do that, you know, in areas of you know, how this industrial equipment are the systems that drive our society. And if you can, you know, we would talk about the power of 1% and how you would, you know, you improve 1% efficiency in power generators across the planet. That's a huge impact. Nowadays, Turntide can have that kind of an impact. But I think that scale kind of taught me, I was always trying to take companies that had an operating model, a design that was maybe anchored in the post-World War II period of time when you had a lot of GIs coming back from the war, and they were used to command and control, hierarchical structure. Business models didn't change frequently. That was not the competitive disruption. You were talking about Amazon disrupting retail. It was a business model disruption, right? That they took. At the time that a lot of these larger companies were established, that wasn't the means of disrupting them, you know, and so they could really solidify and optimize an organization for a particular business model and know that that was going to last for 50 years. I think in the digital transformation, you had to it was business model innovation that you had to drive. And that meant that a lot of the optimizations that had happened were really fighting against you changing. You know, all of that software you put into your ERP system, all the ways you've been managing people and developing them, it wasn't to adapt like this. And so we had to think about it differently. And I think that's informed me on here at Turntide how we can do this out of the gate. You know, I think this hierarchy, thinking of the organization as a machine, is an old mental model, an old way of thinking about it. I think the real competitive differentiator, we talked about adaptivity of these companies who are digitally transforming. How are they really adapting? Technology is an enabler, but it's all about how they apply their human capital, you know, to match where the market is. And I think to do that, you have to have this way of thinking about the organization as a network, not as a hierarchy. And you have to be able to flex it in a way that is aligning with the market. As quickly as the market changes, you change and adapt. And those who adapt faster get to the opportunities faster and they win. And so the competitors have to not just compete on features and whatever they offer, they have to compete on how do they organize and how transformed they are. And that's not an easy thing. So I think that's what's kind of informing, that journey has informed me, you know, coming here. And I think we can really look at agile operating models, what started on the software side and agile development and Scrum and Kanban and some of those methodologies, they can actually be applied to companies. And and I think if you think about the company less about structured top down, but more sideways, where you have a set of disciplines, you know, that people are developing their skills at, and then you mix those multidisciplinary teams together on missions and objectives that align to what's going to be competitive in the market and deliver value for customers. That's a model that I think is a lot more flexible. And then when you change the organization, you know, people aren't feeling like their whole world has, you know, been flipped upside down. It's like, I'm still in my discipline. Now I'm just focused on a different mission. It's more of a blurring the lines, how maybe a consulting company, much more than a traditional manufacturing company or product company operates.
Talking about organizing based on change, based on adaptation, not based on, you know, sort of rigid structure.
I spent a lot of time as an architect, a software architect and solution architect, and there's this understanding in architecture that the piece of software looks like the organization that built it. Yep. And there's a reason for that, you know, because there's interfaces between teams, there's communication protocols, there's all this, and it's like, do you want your software to look like the organization that you have, or do you want it to be the market you know, the flexibility built into it? And I think that's what led to more agile type, the Agile Manifesto and the Agile thinking that kind of started in software, was because of some of those constraints. And I think biology, there is a strong influence of, you know, biology and how how we think
Yeah.
about these problems.
I like that you've introduced this term mental model for sort of rethinking how we organize and rethinking how we operate, so that it's not framed, based on this rigid structure, but it's a lot more nimble and adaptable.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of benefit to this kind of an organization, but there's a downside risk if it's not grounded in leading by context and
Mm,
clear enough context. These network, the organization as a network sounds great, but it could look like my daughter's soccer team when she was 6. Everybody runs to the ball,
you still
and
got
that's
pass.
not what you want either.
And maybe one final topic to touch on, them, and maybe we can wrap up, is culture. I think that we're very passionate about culture at Turntide, and given our point, and we're at this inflection point, and the company is going to scale very quickly. And if we don't have the culture that we want established right, we're going to get a culture. Like you can design a culture and then get it in place and then scale it, or the culture will happen
Yeah.
despite you. And so I'm curious how you think we're doing in that regard. I think it's, organizationally, it's one of our top priorities, but as a newcomer, how's that feeling?
Yeah, it's clear it's a priority. It's clear. I think we're doing great in the sense that 80% of culture in my mind is the fact that you actually make it something you focus on. Like it's an intentional topic of conversation and you reinforce it. It's not just as a tagline or something you say. And I've been in the flip side where I've had to turn around some businesses that had, because of their history, some negative culture, and it's so hard
Hmm.
to and I believe in a lot of the same first principles that we focus on here. I would always come in with a servant leadership, kind of framework and thinking and radical candor and all that. But it's not so easy to take a group of people, especially at scale, who have been on a journey that's very different and kind of change that culture. It takes a long time. So I think it's a competitive differentiator for a company that has a great culture. You see great companies, generally the culture, there's a part of the culture that is really a part of that. And I think Turntide, I love the fact that Ryan and the team have focused on it intentionally as a differentiator from the very beginning. And
Hmm.
it's not just about what you do, it's about how you do it. And there are parts of that GE had that kind of a mindset, and I really appreciated that. When I was there, it builds a sense of stewardship for the business and connection with the customer and a connection to a purpose. And I feel that here, and I feel it even
Yeah.
stronger, right? And I think this radical candor, the idea of radical candor, and the fact that we reflect on the journey and that we're not perfect at it, and it's
Hmm.
okay. And we were talking the other day in an all hands about doing a blameless autopsy on a problem that we had,
Yeah.
and using
Yeah.
that and I think that's so motivating because it's isn't that what it's supposed to be about, a learning organization, right? It's like if we were perfect, no company, every company has issues, right? And if you try to pretend like they're not there, you never fix them. I think it's only through honest self-reflection that you actually get better. And I don't know, that's what I like to do in my personal life. And if I can do that at work, I don't have to be a different person at work than I have to be at home. And that's a really nice thing.
But also, it brings us full circle to what you were mentioning earlier as well, which is that if we want to grow externally as an organization in the marketplace and with our customers, we need to grow internally as an organization, as individuals, and how we work together and ultimately bring value to our customers. And so those kind of go in hand. They're
Yeah,
mirror images of each other.
yeah, for sure.
Well, Brad, thank you for taking the time to chat with me. I really appreciate it, and you're doing some great things. I'm very grateful that you're a part of the company. You've introduced us to people. You've introduced a lot of new ways of working. You've brought a lot of concepts and a lot of great thinking, and you definitely have come in with a bang. And as a shareholder, I'm quite grateful that you're here driving us forward. So thanks again.
Well, thanks, Paul. And I appreciate your guidance as I've been coming into the company and helping me to adapt and understand the journey that the company's been on and giving me that context. And I'm just so happy to be here. I feel I walk around, I'm so much more energized since I've come here. And I think a big part is all the things we've been talking about, over this podcast. So I'm just I'm very honored to have this opportunity, and I'm excited. I just love what we're doing.